Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here. Surprise! Yes, I'm in a completely different place. I've moved over to my desk. Through trial and error, I discovered that my laptop just doesn't have the processing power to do live shows well. So we've moved over to the big boy computer, and hopefully you'll have a better quality experience. Anyway, I'm just going to get right to it. Here on the live show, I answer automotive questions, the ones that you post to my Google Plus page. You can find links to that on my other social networks, such as Facebook, Twitter, and also Google Plus. And that's where I will be taking the questions from. If you are posting the questions to the YouTube video, I cannot see those questions there. Therefore, I will not be answering them. Apologies in advance for that. And there's all the things that I'm not doing. However, EricTheCarGuy.com is available for you 24/7, 365. I would suggest starting with the FAQ page because it contains a lot of information about the questions I get asked. I spent a lot of time putting together. There's information there that should be useful to you. Also, there is a friendly, happy forum over there as well. So if you can't find anything in the FAQ, we have other means. So even though I do these shows every 2 weeks, EricTheCarGuy.com is always there available for you. But this show starts out as, well, a half an hour. And then, well, we see where it goes from there because sometimes it runs long. But anyway, I kind of like this setup because I'm actually a bit more comfortable and I can sort of see things better. So maybe I won't screw up as many names, which I want to apologize for that in advance if I mess up your name, but I'll do my best not to mess up your questions. How's that? Because, I mean, that's the important part now, isn't it? Anyhow, Mike Campbell has a 2000 Jeep Grand Cherokee straight 6 engine. The wrist pins went bad on 2 motors. Rebuilding this engine, what do I need to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And is this a common problem? I say this often, maybe every one of these shows. I don't recommend rebuilding engines. I recommend replacing them with engines that come with warranties and such, because unless you are really good friends with the machine shop and know about all the measuring and stuff that you need to do in order to do a proper rebuild, a few thousandths of an inch can kill you if you don't do it correctly, especially when it comes to things like oil pressure. So I don't recommend rebuilding the engine, and you've already experienced a couple of failures. What I would recommend in that instance is seeking out a remanufactured long block, or short block actually might be a better option, but you know, I'd go for the long block. Long block comes with a cylinder head. Short block just comes with the pistons and everything down the bottom end. This way you swap everything over from your old engine onto that and you walk away with the warranty and everything else. That is, in my opinion, your best option unless you're into rebuilding engines every day and you have really good friends at the machine shop. Outside of that, let's move on to the next question. Brent Adherence, windshield. The windshield of my Volkswagen has been badly scuffed by worn wiper blades. It's a used car and it came as part of the package, a hidden feature visible for the most part during night driving. Is there a way I can repair the damage without replacing the entire windshield? No amount of cleaning has solved the problem, and visibility is a major issue at night. I can't say that I'm an expert in this, but my experience has been it's rare that you're able to get those kind of things out. And you're probably going to end up replacing the windshield. That is most likely going to be your most effective option. I can't think of anything. I mean, sometimes they can buff things out. Really, the people you want to contact are your local glass people, the people that replace windshields, and they can look at it and they can assess whether or not they can repair it. And if they can't, well, they'll give you an estimate on a new windshield. That's how I would go about that. Ford Capri driver. Hey, Eric, fellow classic Ford owner here. I own a European 1975 Ford Capri 3.0. As far as I know, the valve seals on it have never been changed. My engine burns oil and seems to smoke a bit on startup and on hard acceleration. The engine has about 150,000 miles and has good oil pressure. I switched from 10W40 to 20W50 last September, which is what Ford specs for this engine. It burns quite a bit less now. Do you think it's the seals, PCV valve, valve guides, worn rings? Thanks. Almost always, in my experience, engines don't wear in one particular spot, and everybody seems to hope when they've got a burning oil issue that it has something to do with the valve seals, because obviously that's the easiest thing. But as I said, in my experience, engines wear across the board. And most times when you have a burning oil issue, especially the description you said, whenever you accelerate, that's piston rings, almost always. So in that situation, you're probably looking at an engine replacement. As I mentioned earlier, you can't go for a rebuild if that's, I don't think that's going to be a difficult engine to find. Salvage is also another option, but I mean, if you're going to go that far, I would go for some sort of reman with a warranty. That in my opinion, is the best way to go if you're going to DIY it. Unless the engine is like rare or difficult to find parts for, or just difficult to find a reman for, or you're doing some kind of restoration kind of thing. If it's their daily driver, I say go for a remanufactured deal. Other than that, if you want to have fun and give it a shot, well, there you go. I'm going to be rebuilding the engine, obviously, in my Ford Fairmont, and I'm hoping to go through the process and show how detailed and in-depth it can get. And hopefully I don't screw it up. It's been a while since I did it. We'll find out, I guess, won't we? Tracy Roundtree. Hi, Eric. Has a 1999 Ford Explorer 5-liter V8 engine, rear-wheel drive, 4-speed automatic transmission, 124,560 miles. How specific is that? That's awesome. My question is, I have a problem with my instrument cluster gauges. When I started up, the check gauge light on my instrument cluster, I assume, comes on. The only gauges that I do not see working are the temp gauge and the oil pressure gauge. After a few minutes of driving, the light goes off. Both gauges come back to life. Where should I be looking? What should I be looking for? Oil level is optimal. Coolant level is optimal. Thanks, Tracy. Okay, that sounds like an electrical issue. It could be inside the cluster itself. You have two different gauges that are affected. Really, what should be done is, I mean, I imagine if you would have had an oil pressure problem that you would experience maybe some engine noise, but oil pressure is a big deal. So it's in these situations where gauges are in question, I like to bypass the gauges and hook up a manual gauge to the oil pressure and see if I actually have oil pressure. However, you seem to have two gauges and a gauge light that comes on, and both of those things are indicating to me, it doesn't seem likely that you'd have a problem with both of those gauges simultaneously, other than if there was a or the wiring or something of that nature. Those electrical problems like that can be difficult to nail down. I can't think of any specific area that I can tell you to look, but as I said, personally, I would want to know that I had oil pressure, and to do that, I actually have a video on how to check oil pressure. Remove the oil sending unit, plug in a manual gauge, start it up, check the pressure. If it's good, you're good. As far as coolant temperature, once again, if that's out of spec, you usually notice, usually steam, something going on to give you an indication that the vehicle is overheating or there's a problem there. But in that situation, I can't say for sure, honestly, but it sounds to me like something in the gauge cluster might be awry. Thomas K. Balab. Well, that's one of those names I'm going to have trouble with. Apologies for that, Thomas. Hey, Eric, I have a 1996 Kia Sportage 2-liter MR dual overhead cam. Whenever the RPMs get around 4,000 and above, the engine starts to squeal, which has caused me to simply avoid letting the engine rev so high by short shifting and also applying more, applying more throttle. What could be the problem? Also, I noticed after sitting for a few hours, the oil light stays on for a couple of seconds after starting the engine. Should I be worried? Always be worried if you see the oil light on and the engine is running, because that indicates that you have a loss of oil pressure. I mean, if it's on all the time, it could be a problem with the gauge. It could be a problem with the gauge, but once again, going back to, you want to know for sure. So remove the sending unit, plug in an actual oil pressure gauge and check the engine's oil pressure. If you have engine noise and you have an oil pressure light on, those two things are not good and should be addressed immediately, in my opinion. Especially if you drive the vehicle any distance or any length of time, because things like that could let you down on the side of the highway. Not sure what the noise is, if I'm honest. That's going to require further investigation, but first on my list would be checking the oil pressure. As I said, it's just like if you don't have any blood pressure, you're not going to function for very long. The engine's the same way. If it doesn't have oil pressure, it's not going to be around for this world for too much longer. So be aware of that. Tim Me, love the channel and thanks for helping me in the past through your videos. I've got a high mileage 1996 Ranger 2.35 speed that refuses to go into gear above about 2% of the time. I drove it reliably for 15,000 miles now. While it's usually okay, sometimes at a red light or stop sign, it won't go into gear without turning it off first. But when I immediately start it back up with the clutch depressed, it doesn't roll, like it's like the slave is messed up. I'm not quite sure where we're going with that. 98% of the time, it's smooth as butter. Has an occasional grinding sound, very faint and neutral while stopped. Trans fluid was replaced. When acquired, it looked and felt okay. Typical pop into second, then to first or reverse doesn't help because it won't go into gear 2% of the time. Any advice would be appreciated. If a manual transmission does not go into gear while the engine is running, that's a clutch problem. That means that the clutch is not allowing the transmission to stop spinning, and therefore the synchronizers may not be able to stop the gears from spinning. In fact, Paul Cangelosi, who came out and rebuilt my T5 transmission, did a very good explanation about how synchronizers work. In fact, we did a video about that very thing. I've also done a video in the past about how clutches work. But in your situation, what you're talking about, especially turning it off, it goes into gear fine. That's one of the ways that I determine whether or not it's a transmission problem or clutch problem. If you turn it off and it goes into gear fine, it's a clutch problem. If it's running and you can't put it into gear, clutch problem. So that's where I'd be looking for that. It could also be the clutch hydraulics are starting to fail, and maybe there's a little bit of air in there. They're not causing it to release fully. You might look into that, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that slave cylinder is stuffed up inside the transmission that is not accessible because it's part of the throwout bearing assembly. That being the case, it would be difficult to tell if that was leaking or not. So I guess bottom line is you'll be pulling that transmission out to find out. And if you're going to go that far, you might as well replace the clutch. Be prepared to replace the slave cylinder at the same time, and I bet it'll shift great after that. Why not throw in a transmission fluid change, because they don't weigh as much when you get the fluid out when you pull those transmissions out. Just a tip there for you. Patrick Paulson. Hi, Eric. Has a problem with a 1998 Honda Prelude BB6. The parking brake indicator lights up when I accelerate. It has gotten worse over time, and it's almost all the time now. What do you think the problem could be? Also, the car seems to have lost a lot of power recently. Well, I can tell you your front brakes are probably worn down, because the reason that's coming on is because your brake fluid is low. There's a float sensor inside the master cylinder, and this is actually a common issue I've seen many times in the past. When brake fluid gets low, brake fluid doesn't evaporate or go anyplace. It usually gets low because the brake pads wear. Since the front calipers have larger pistons, they're responsible for most of the brake fluid going down. Therefore, I'd be looking at your front brakes and make sure that you have enough pad material left. And if you do not, I would replace the front brake pads and also top off the master cylinder after you do so. Strongly recommend against pushing the caliper piston back in without cracking the bleeder valve open, especially on Hondas. I've seen it happen several times, especially on older ones, where you do that and you ruin the master cylinder by doing a brake job. So I've got a video that I'll post a link to in the description to show you how to push the pistons back without forcing fluid back in the master cylinder, and that should save you from buying a master cylinder in addition to replacing the front brakes. As for the loss of power, could be a number of things. There'll be a link in the description to my FAQ about performance issues. I suggest you run through it, and perhaps through that you will find an answer to that problem. But you know, if you don't have any check engine lights, start with the basics like plugs and air filter. Taylor W. Hey Eric, I have an 07 Civic with 130,000 miles on it. The ride quality of it seems to be more bumpy than most cars. Nothing is loose in the suspension that I can find, and the struts aren't leaking oil. I guess my question is, what do you suggest is the best bang for the buck when reviewing a suspension system? Thank you for all your help. If you don't see any leaking in the struts, I would leave them alone. I would say probably, most likely, your problem is in the tires. Hondas especially are very particular about the tires you use. You buy cheap tires and you put them on a Honda, it rides like garbage. Also, are the tires overinflated? I believe that vehicle should be around 30 or 32 PSI. If you're above that, that will make the tires more like basketballs than tires. And as you drive down the road, you'll lose contact with the road and you won't be able to handle. You won't be able to drive the car properly. Therefore, I would suggest checking the tire pressures, also the amount of wear that's on the tires. And once again, if you're buying really cheap tires, rethink that philosophy, because the best investment you can make for your vehicle that will have an overall effect on every single system. Everybody says, no, I did a video on this, and it's the most important purchase for your vehicle. And people are like, no, oil is the most important purchase for your vehicle. No, brakes are the most important purchase for your vehicle. Well, none of those things mean diddly squat without good tires. You won't be able to stop well. You won't be able to accelerate. It doesn't matter if your engine's blown up or not. So I say tires have the biggest effect. Always invest in good tires. Good tires, good shoes, good bed, anything that goes between you and the ground. Good chair. That's the philosophy, especially with tires. When it comes to vehicles, tires are where you put your money. In fact, just as an example, my Acura Vigor, bought it for $500, spent $650 on the tires, never regretted that decision whatsoever. Just saying. Robert Scooby, what's up, Eric? I have a 1998 Toyota Camry. When I turn the key, all it does is click and not turn over. Battery said 11 volts, and it's a good starter. Tested it off the car. I'd really appreciate the advice, and you're awesome. Hope this is the right posting place. Thanks. Well, static battery voltage should be 12.6 volts. So therefore, I believe you probably have a problem with the battery or possibly its connections. Because the starter is a big load on the system. Amp load is what I'm speaking of. Whenever that is activated, if you have a poor connection, it will just basically sever it. There won't be a pathway for all those amps to flow down to the starter. So you either have a bad battery, which I suspect, because like I said, it should be 12.6 volts. You've only got 11. But then you have to find out if once you figure out what's going on with the battery, you have to find out what kind of condition the charging system is in. The battery could be bad because you got a weak charging system. So it's a good idea to also check the charging system after you address the battery and make sure that's working properly as well. That way your electrical system is happy. So that's where I'd go with that. Yu Win Chen, high pressure refrigerant tube is always dripping water and spread all over the engine room. I want to wrap it with thermal proof strip. Is this okay? First of all, it's not likely to be the high pressure side of the system. It's more likely to be the low pressure side of the system that's causing that condensation that you're seeing. And that's just a question of a humid climate is what I suspect you live in. So if you're using air conditioning and you've got a humid climate, you're going to have that condensation. The factory, the manufacturer did not wrap it in thermal tape or do anything of that type, and I suggest you follow the same philosophy. So they thought it was good the way it is, and I don't think you should put anything on it. The condensation will most likely occur no matter what. So I would pretty much leave that alone. I don't recommend putting anything or wrapping anything around those lines. Alistair Haddon, let's see, just replaced the steering rack on an Accord. Why is there a decal on the lower steering column cover that says to remove the steering wheel? If not, SRS damage may occur. How would not removing the steering wheel cause damage? The only thing I can think of is possibly damage the wires behind the airbag if the wheel were to be turned while the rack is removed. Thanks. How you hope you had a good time in Finland, I believe is what that comment was. Yes, I had an amazing time in Finland. I even got a t-shirt. I'm going to be writing a blog about that tomorrow, hopefully putting that out soon. But to answer your question, you're right. If the steering wheel is turned with the rack out of the car, I'm not sure whether they say remove it. Maybe it's lock it into place, because back when I used to have one of those steering wheel locks, I would just lock it into place, you know, stick it between the front seat and the steering wheel to hold the steering wheel in place while I did work on the power steering rack. But the reason being is just as you suspect. There's an electrical connection. It's called a cable reel, which is a wire that's sort of wrapped in a spiral. Looks like a clock spring. And in fact, some people call it a clock spring. So as you turn the wheel, the wiring still stays intact, but it either expands or contracts. But if you turn the wheel a bit without the power steering rack connected, and then you reconnect the power steering rack, you could overextend that wiring inside that clock spring or cable reel. And as a result, you would sever the connection between the airbag, the horn, and everything that's on your steering wheel. You could have volume controls, all that stuff would go away. So to avoid that damage, and if you're doing a power steering rack, you do not want the steering wheel to move when you do that. I'm usually pretty good about, you know, I just disconnect the connection. I've done several videos on power steering rack replacement. There's a U-joint with a slip joint in behind it. You can pull up off the power steering rack and then lock the steering wheel into place if you can, or just make sure that it doesn't turn, and you should be good. But that's what they're trying to avoid. Kelly de Agostino, I think I got that close. Eric, I have a 2004 Honda Odyssey that my hubby switched out the passenger window regulator and motor from a 2002 Odyssey, and my hubby said it was wired backwards, so he has to rewire it, as well as some other things now. Does this sound like a legitimate problem, because I thought all of Honda Odysseys were compatible from 99 to 04, or is my hubby just a complete dumbass? Sorry. I don't want to come out and call your hubby a dumbass. That just doesn't seem right. But I believe you are correct in that those parts should be the same all the way up through for window regulator-ness. As far as rewiring it, no, I've never had to rewire one, and I wouldn't think you would have to rewire one. It's a simple motor, which means that you change the direction of current flow going through it to make the window go up or go down. No, I I don't think you should have to mess with the wiring on that, especially if you took it out of another one. So it should be a plug and play kind of thing, unless he got the wrong side. So if that's what would be opposite. So everything would be opposite on the opposite side. So the passenger side and the driver's side motors are the same motor, but all the regulator assembly and everything is in there differently, because they're the same motors. They're just put in there back a mirror image from one side to the other. So maybe he's got the incorrect side, is what I'm thinking. But that was funny, Kelly. Thank you. Brian Burke, ignore if this is a dumb question, but does it do any damage to floor a car? Is there a point where it might? Also, I remember hearing something a million years ago about flooring it occasionally to blow off build-up carbon. I have a 2016 Accord V6, if that matters. Apologies for my ignorance. Never apologize for ignorance. You're asking questions. That's how you learn things. That's how I learn things. I certainly don't know everything. Sometimes I question whether I'm even qualified to do this show. Anyway. I do it occasionally, and I just like to open up the taps, and my favorite place to do it is like on ramps on highways, just to see how the vehicle can perform, because braking's great and all that kind of stuff, and that can help you stay out of danger, but there are times where accelerating can also help keep you out of danger, and also can point out if there's any problems with the transmission or the engine or those kind of things. To me, that's my excuse. It's my diagnostic tool. My wife doesn't necessarily like it. That's why I don't do that when she's in the car. But yeah, sometimes I take her van out and open it up, just for those very reasons, just so that it opens it up. It doesn't hurt the engine at all. The engine was designed to rev, and it was designed to work within a certain RPM range. And I'm assuming you have an automatic transmission, so there's the modern cars baby you too much. They have these self-preservation systems built in, and they, rev limiters and things like that. They start to cut the fuel off if you rev it too much. They just have things built in to make sure that they don't self-destruct, because I guess they don't trust you. So your car knows better than you, apparently. But yeah, occasionally getting on the on-ramp, I say floor it. I say open it up, and obviously when you go to merge, be very aware of what you're merging with. But a nice long on-ramp, those are my best friends. All right, Wes G. Hey, Eric, my dad has a 2001 Jeep Grand Cherokee 4-liter engine with about 18,000 miles with a blown head gasket. Let's see. And about 18,000 miles with a blown head gasket on the number 3 cylinder. Occasionally, when he tries to start it, it will freeze as if it's hydrolocking. However, turning it off and trying it again gets it to start properly. The Jeep also has a misfire until it warms up to operating temperature. I put a bottle of block sealer, or he put a bottle of block sealer and changed the coil pack, and this fixed it. The reason he has a blown head is because he bypassed the heater, and the hose he used came apart and dumped out most of the coolant, and a lot got on the old coil pack and damaged it. He recently changed the coolant without flushing it and reset the computer, and now both the misfire and starting problems are back. Any ideas? Wow, that's a lot of stuff happening there. You got to address mechanical problems. And personally, I'm not a fan of mechanic in a can, meaning that block sealer to deal with head gaskets. I like using my tools. I'll pull the cylinder head off and replace the head gasket. Why not? Also, you have to check for warpage with those kinds of things. That's also a really good idea to do. Misfire, and what's happening when it starts, hydrolock, it's not like that goes away. It sounds to me more like there's some sort of misfire, or it sounds like a timing issue. It sounds like something's not firing at the right time. So instead of the piston being at the proper position to where when the spark plug goes off, that it causes the crankshaft to rotate, it sounds like it's going off at the incorrect time and causing the crankshaft to stop dead in its tracks. It sounds more like that than hydrolocking, because hydrolocking, once it happens, it's happened. And hydrolocking, by the way, bends connecting rods, and bent connecting rods equate to broken connecting rods down the line. Once again, going back to, if you have a known problem with the head gasket, fix the head gasket. As far as the ignition system and the other things that are going on there, address those as well, but start with mechanical. So many people do that. They come to me with performance issues, stuff like that, and they say, well, my car's doing this, that, or the other thing, and they completely ignore the fact that it's a mechanical device. And they go after all these electronics and sensors and say, that's the problem, that's the problem, that's the problem. But if you have a known mechanical problem, address it. And if the sealer didn't fix it, then okay, to be fair, sometimes that can work, but you have to follow the directions to the letter. And how long it works, you know, I've heard of people that have successfully done that and gotten away with it. Personally, I don't want to put that gunk in my cooling system. Like I said, I like to play with my tools, and I have multiple vehicles, so I'm not everybody. Anyhow, that's how I would pursue that. As far as coolant, ruining coil packs and all this other stuff, and yeah, it's hard to say, but you got a misfire, you got a known head gasket problem. Head case 620. Hey Eric, love the videos. Keep up the good work. I have an intermittent rough idle on my 2001 Honda Civic LX. I think everybody does. After driving for about an hour at highway speeds, it runs rough like it's down a cylinder. I checked for codes, had a pending code for a misfire on cylinder 2. I didn't clear the code. I drove it the next day, and it did it again after driving at highway speeds. I checked for codes again, and the pending code was gone. It doesn't do it when it's cold, and it doesn't do it after driving 15 minutes. I swapped coil 1 and 2 to isolate the spark issue. If it was a fueling issue or vacuum leak, it should affect all cylinders, or at least more than one of them, right? Thanks. First off, Hondas rarely have fuel delivery issues. So I take that off the table like right out of the gate. If the Honda runs, then they don't normally have problems with fuel injectors. They hardly ever have problems with fuel pumps unless they're aftermarket replacements. So Honda fuel systems are relatively bulletproof. However, ignition systems, not so much. In fact, that's just the opposite. So, but once again, going back to mechanical, Hondas use solid valve trains, which means they don't have hydraulic lifters, which means the valves sometimes require periodic adjustment. I'm not saying that's the problem, because it's rare that you'll adjust valves and things will get better. It's more common that somebody goes in and adjusts the valves improperly and burns up an exhaust valve, thus causing a misfire. So if somebody's been in there adjusting the valves or playing around with that stuff, then that's possible. So in your case, I would suggest starting with a compression test, and particularly cylinder number 2, to see if that's all good. So verify the engine's mechanical health before you start going after other things. I mean, you've got a misfire code. My experience, misfire codes, particularly of Hondas of that vintage, are not very accurate. Basically, misfire codes are calculated based on crank sensor and cam sensor readings. They look at the acceleration, or they look for the acceleration of the crankshaft after there's an ignition event. If it doesn't seem one that's significant, it says that there's a misfire, and it says that it's on blah, blah, blah cylinder. And in my experience, it's not very good at guessing which cylinder is bad. However, you know, it said number 2, so that might be a good place to start. In fact, a quick and dirty way is just to pull the spark plugs and examine them. If the spark plug for cylinder number 2 is a different color or coated with some kind of soot or something like that, it could indicate that that cylinder is not firing correctly. Spark plugs are a window into the combustion chamber. It takes a while to learn to read them, but sometimes it's pretty obvious. Sometimes it's not so much, but it's a good place to start. Another thing I will say about Hondas is they really like their NGK or Nip and Denso spark plugs. So if you've got anything else but one of those 2 brands in there, get rid of them and put NGK or Nip and Denso in there and see if the problem goes away. Because I've fixed many a Honda just by changing the spark plugs and putting the correct ones in. Just saying. And let's see, it's a 2001, so I don't believe it has a distributor cap or any of that kind of stuff to worry about. So start with the plugs and see what you got from there. Also, there'll be a link in the description to my performance diagnosis FAQ, which can lead you to other things. In addition, I have an entire section on Honda idle problems. So there'll also be a link in the description to an FAQ about Honda idle problems that could possibly help you as well. Ooh, here's a challenging name. Yuri Yashchinson. If I got that right, I am awesome. If not, well, then I'm just the same old normal me. Hi, Eric. I have an 07 Civic Si with 90,000 miles. Every time I press on the clutch master, it makes an annoying clicking noise. I use lithium greased, hoping it would fix the noise, but it would return in 2 to 3 days. Is there anything I can do to eliminate the noise, or should I plan on changing it? Does it affect gear shifting too? Shift normal on low revs and hard on high revs. Change the training fluid and clutch fluid with Honda oil. Very good on changing the transmission fluid with Honda transmission fluid. That's really important. Not doing that can cause shifting problems down the road. As for the clicking, now I'm scratching my head trying to remember. There was a service bulletin on this some time ago about correcting this problem, and I'm struggling to try to remember how or what it actually corrected the problem. Gosh darn it. But I would check to see Honda clutch hydraulics are known for problems, and if it was changed out with an aftermarket slave cylinder at one point, that could be the issue. I'm trying to remember what we did for the clicking issue. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. And if I can dig it up or if I can find it, I'll put a link to it in the description. But as I said, I believe there was a serviceable on that particular issue. But I would say possibly a problem with the clutch master cylinder itself. Other than sometimes the slave cylinder, but I mean, if you're hearing it inside the cabin, it's the clutch master something, either with the linkage or something with the pedal. But I can't remember. But I do know exactly what you're talking about. No, I'm just talking. So I'm going to move on, and if I find it, I'll put a link to it in the description. I apologize for dropping the ball on that one. All right, Chad Johnson has a 2004 Subaru Legacy 2.5 35th anniversary edition, and every time I hit a rough patch of road, it acts like I'm sliding on ice and sways back and forth and bounces a lot. I'm not sure if it's just the struts are bad or if there are any bad bushings or control arms. Everything looks good and feels tight when I put it up in the air. But once down on the ground at speed, it feels like I'm going to lose control of the car. Thanks, love what you do. Really like your fixing it forward segment. Thank you. Fixing it forward is awesome. And I'm going to make that, I'm going to finish my Fairmont. I'm going to really dig into that. And I've got some ideas. Anyhow, to address your issue, once again, going back to tires, if everything seems tight and the front suspension, that's a good thing. Look for leaks around struts because it sounds like it could be a strut issue. They could be bouncing too much. And usually if that happens, you'll see oil residue on the outside. Struts are filled with oil. If the oil leaks out, the struts are not able to work properly. But once again, going back to what we talked about, I think it was a Civic earlier, if one, the tires are overinflated, so make sure they are inflated the correct pressure. Usually a door jam sticker will tell you what they're supposed to be inflated to. You just open the door, driver or passenger, and look in there, and there'll be a sticker that tells you what the proper tire size is and what to inflate the tires to. Subarus, all-wheel drive. Super important if you replace the tires. Replace all 4 tires with the same type. Just do all 4 tires at once. And once again, cannot stress enough the importance of tires and ride quality. It will be like you bought a new car if you spend good money on tires. But certainly check out the rest of the suspension system first and make sure it's good. And as I said, take a good look at those struts and see if there's any oil leaking out. If they're old and they look in question, you just want to change them. Struts are things that help control ride quality, but nothing on the vehicle affects ride quality more than tires. Hear me now, understand me later. So look at those tires, make sure they're correct pressure, and don't ever cheap out on tires. I will say that again and again and again and again. In fact, the whole reason I was in Finland, testing winter tires. Special thanks to Nokian for that. All right, we're getting towards that part of the program where we're getting towards the end, and I go all random on it. So I read it from the bottom. Let's see. Jordan Mermack, 2011 Ford Taurus with blend door actuator on the passenger side that 2 months ago was not working correctly. Stuck on high heat yesterday. It again was stuck on high heat. Today it worked perfectly. I bought the part today for $27. Every other failure I've read about is a loud clicking from the dash. Do you think I should dig into it? Sounds to me like you've already made up your mind. I mean, you bought the part. There also could be something that's causing it to bind inside the HVAC system. And the way I make that determination is I remove the actuator and see if I can move the door by hand. And if I'm able to move it freely by hand, then I can reasonably assume that there could be a problem with the actuator itself. That's my test, if you will. And sometimes in 2011, it might even have codes for it. If you have the right scan tool or the right button pushing abilities, sometimes it will reveal a bad actuator. All right. Let's see. Nate W. Thibodeau. Is it okay to have those OBDII driving monitor scan tools plugged in all the time, like a scan gauge 2 or ultra gauge? Am I concerned that having a constant device, when people post a new thing, the whole thing moves. Having a constant device accessing the car's computer may wear things out sooner, but having the real-time stats displayed is really cool. It will have no effect whatsoever. I mean, that's just monitors. The computer's just telling you what it's doing. It's not affecting it at all. In fact, if a little while back I did the electronic special where they had a device that you could plug into your OBDII, and you'll like this if you like seeing real-time data. You could plug it into your OBDII port, and it had a head-up display that would display your RPMs and some other stuff with that, and that was plugged into the OBDII port all the time. It's not going to affect anything whatsoever. You'd be fine. February, I've seen them around before. I'm going to try to condense this as much as possible. 99 Accord V6, 171,000 miles. There is a grinding sound coming from the right front corner under hard acceleration from a complete stop, or if I'm accelerating while turning right from a complete stop. I suspect it is the axle. But how do I check it? It sounds as if the splines are not meshing properly. Axle is a month-old reman Honda unit. There is no such thing. This started happening after I had an accident in the front right corner. I hit another Accord, both airbags deployed, but there's almost no visible damage to my car. I don't know if I bent the frame or anything like that. Thanks for answering. Okay, there's no such thing as a Honda reman axle. Basically, if you buy a reman axle from Honda, it is an aftermarket axle. Honda does not reman axles as far as I know. In fact, the only way you can buy axles from Honda is in pieces. You buy the inner joint with the shaft and you buy the outer joint, and that's that. And they don't even bother doing it because it's super expensive. So what they do is they buy aftermarket parts and they sell them over at the counter at a markup. That being said, as far as your grinding noise, it's super difficult for me to do any kind of noise diagnosis through a form like this. But it does sound like it could be an axle issue, but the wild card here is the fact that you've been in a collision. I've done a video about a collision and an inspection, suspension inspection after a collision that may be of use to you. I'm going to post a link to that in the description, and hopefully that can help lead you toward a place to an inspection where you can find out what's going on. But many times you may not necessarily be able to see bent components. Sometimes you have to put it on an alignment rack and see how far things are out to know, because the things control arms and stuff are connected to could also bend, and if they do, they affect the overall alignment of the vehicle, and that could, wear tires unevenly. That could cause other components, possibly the noise that you're having. It's really difficult to say. So it could be a lot of different things in a situation with an accident, and a good inspection is a great place to start. Hanky Whitry, hey Eric, have a 2007 Toyota Wish and had a 2004 Toyota Noah. Okay, I'm not familiar with those models. Which scanner can I use? One that can show live data, both a JP702 scanner, but I keep getting a fail to communicate. Do you know where I can get an English service manual? I'm a little confused by your question on a lot of levels, because maybe the scanner that you're using is unable to communicate. Not really sure. You know who's an expert at this kind of thing, and I don't know, as far as it sounds like you're in a different country. Scanner Danner is who I'd recommend, and I'll put a link to his channel in the description. I mean, he's got Scanner in his name. Actually, his name's Paul. Real nice guy and super knowledgeable about this stuff. In fact, behind me is his book on my coffee table, which is excellent, by the way. Chris Rocha. Hey, Chris, how's it going? The wife and I are headed to Colorado. Question, I'm driving a 98 Chevy Astrovan all-wheel drive. When I step on the brakes, it pulls left. I'm pretty sure it's a caliper, but I forget if it doesn't mean it's the right caliper isn't working or the left one dragging. Forget exactly what causes the pull. When the brake applies on the working caliper, it pulls toward that side. So it's usually the opposite side that is the bad caliper. My favorite way of checking is with some sort of thermometer. In fact, you can get them at, dare I say, Harbor Freight, relatively inexpensively, and you can just sort of aim it at the road or after you go for a drive, and you can look at whatever one's hotter. That's normally where the bad caliper is, if you want to confirm that. Plus, that tool is just really handy to have around. I keep mine around a little bit. I think I just caught up to myself. Eric Espinoza. Hi, Eric. Great name, by the way. I have a 2003 Acura TL Type S with almost 270,000 miles. I know you're not particularly fond of this model Acura, and I completely understand your reasons behind that sentiment. Yes, I am not fond of those. Personally, I love it, and I wanted to ask if you had any advice or suggestions in keeping a car with this much mileage and healthy operating shape beyond the basics and routine maintenance. And yes, I'm on my second transmission. Go figure. Current training is going strong. Also, I noticed almost every time I start the engine, whether cold or warm start, a few seconds after putting the transmission in gear, I hear a faint electric buzz sound that comes from the engine bay, and the instrument cluster lights, radio, climate control, and sometimes the headlights will dim ever so slightly and only for a split second. Heard a rumor from some Acura forum that it's the ABS system doing a check. Wondering what your thoughts are. Car did this ever since I bought it at 177,000 miles. Thanks in advance. Love your videos and your show and everything you do. Best wishes, Eric. Thank you, Eric. And you know, it's cool that you love a car. You know, I love weird cars too. So yeah, it's all good. Anyway, the sound that you hear, you're exactly correct. That's the ABS activating. And it's just a check. It's completely normal. Nothing to be concerned about. As far as the lights dimming on occasion with that many miles on it, it's hard to say. Could be something with the electric load detection, or it could be something with an alternator. Once again, that's hard to say. I mean, with that many miles on it. But if it's going, you know, just for the heck of it, check the electrical system output, see what it's doing, and you know, take things from there. Pauline Jackson, hey Eric, I'm a big fan. Love your enthusiasm. I'm getting estimates for my clutch to be replaced. It's a 1990 Honda Accord sedan EX. What would you say is a reasonable price range? Aside from that, how much would you charge for such a time-consuming job? I watch your videos. Thank you. I see what all goes into it. I know that labor will be much higher than the clutch, and I was looking for a clutch kit. Some don't come with a flywheel or a little gasket seals, etc. So I wouldn't. So I would appreciate any info that I'm not aware of. Thanks, Pauline. Pauline, in my opinion, that is one of the easier clutches to do. The only one easier, in my opinion, is a Civic. It's really not that difficult. As far as the pricing, I believe the book time is somewhere around 5 hours. Could actually be 4, if I'm not mistaken. You don't need to replace the flywheel. In fact, many times, you've seen in my clutch videos where I often just clean up the flywheel the way it is and put a new clutch and pressure plate in there. Not a bad idea to check the rear main seal while you're in there, just to prevent any leaks in the future. Just for the heck of it, it's just a matter of removing that flywheel and taking a look. You can also have flywheels sent out to be reconditioned, resurfaced. In fact, I'm looking forward to actually using my brake lathe on the one for my Ford. I'm going to try that out. As far as the parts go, I can't see them costing more than $200. So you're looking at about 5 hours labor in that. And you know, I'll let you in on this. There's an app for your phone. It's called Repair Pal, and it does estimates on repairs just like this. So I'll link it in the description, and it's usually pretty good at estimating these kinds of things. But also, I have a V manual on this job over at my website. I actually have a video that goes step by step on how to replace that very clutch in that vehicle. So if you really want, well, okay, it's a CL of about the same vintage, an Acura CL and a Honda Accord. They're the same car. They're just rebadged and they put a different front end and back end on it, but it's the exact same thing underneath, you know, the engine and clutch. But I do have a V manual on that. You know what? Think about taking it on yourself. It is a bit heavy though, so you got to be careful getting that thing in and out of there. But it's doable. I did it on the ground. Ugh, it's not fun. Where am I at? I'm getting to that. I'm going to answer one more. We're getting to the 15-minute mark past where we go here. Okay, automotive questions are what I'm looking for. All right, go back down to where I was. All right, Tom Smith. Hey Eric, what's up? I have a question about my 01 Taurus. It has about 90,000 miles. I can't figure out why my dash lights and headlights dim occasionally and then get bright again. I have a new battery and there are no dash lights on. After a week of noticing this, it seems to dim when the cooling fan goes on. Doesn't matter if it's idling or going down the highway. Is it damaging or anything could continue driving this way? Just for the heck of it, I would check the charging system. Also the battery, you know, that's often overlooked in these situations. The battery is really the heart of the electrical system. And if you don't have a good battery, it affects all the other electrical systems on the vehicle, especially modern vehicles. If you get a modern vehicle with a weird battery, nothing works right. And it's, you know, my performance teacher many years ago taught me that. He's like, you know, don't neglect system voltage. It's just like, you know, don't forget the basics of engine performance. As I talked about earlier, don't forget that it's an engine, it's an air compressor, it has to work. So verify its mechanical function. With the electrical system, it's the battery. Make sure the battery and the electrical system function well, because if they don't, it's not going to work right. You say when the cooling fans come on, that's a high amp circuit. So perhaps there could be something, you could have a cooling fan that's going bad and it's causing a super amp draw on the whole system. So if you verify that the battery is good, the charging system is good, then the next place I would look is I would be checking the amps coming out of the cooling fan. Since that's such a high amp circuit, I'd be using an inductive ammeter. And I don't know exactly what the amp draw should be, but I mean, 20 amps maybe. I don't know. On a cooling fan, cooling fans are up there as far as an amp draw. But anyway, that's where I look on that. But I'm going to wrap the show up because I got almost every question. Almost, not all of them. If I didn't get to your question, I'm going to apologize. But once again, I will ask you to head over to EricTheCarGuy.com because there's answers there, FAQs. Also, I made a lot of references to links that I'm going to be putting in the description. Give me a couple minutes to put that together, but that's what I intend to do right now. And so after a few minutes, those links should appear there for you that I discussed during the program. Outside of that, the next show will be 2 weeks from now. Let's see, it should be on looks like the 16th will be the next live show that I do here. I want to thank you for watching. As far as following me on social networks, it's Google+, Facebook, Twitter, also Instagram. Close each of my videos with, be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Once again, thanks for watching. I'll see you in a couple weeks.